The Galaxy Council chamber was the largest structure ever built by intelligent life. It floated in the empty space between 3 star systems. A massive dome of crystalline light where 12 species gathered to discuss the fate of worlds. On this day, every seat was filled, and every delegate watched the holographic display at the center of the room with growing horror. Ambassador Tallery of the Volante stood at her podium, her silver skin flickering with colors that showed her distress. She had lived for 300 years and had seen many terrible things, but nothing like this. The display showed 400 warships moving through space in perfect formation. They were Xanthari vessels, black as night and shaped like insects, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet in half. "They are going to Earth," she said, her voice echoing through the silent chamber. "The Xanthari Empire has chosen its next target." A murmur passed through the assembled delegates. Earth was a small planet on the edge of the galaxy, home to a species that had not yet discovered faster-than-light travel. The humans, as they called themselves, were primitive by galactic standards. They still used chemical rockets to explore their own solar system. They still burned fossil fuels for energy. They had never made contact with any other intelligent species. Renchel, an elderly diplomat from the Korvathi Federation, leaned forward in his seat. His gray scales caught the light as he studied the display. Why would the Xanthari waste resources on such a primitive world? Earth has no strategic value. The Xanthari do not care about strategy, another delegate replied. They care about conquest. They have taken 17 star systems in the last decade. Their empire grows while we sit and watch. Talori touched a control on her podium, and the display changed. It now showed Earth itself, a blue and green jewel floating in the darkness of space. White clouds swirled across its surface. Lights glittered on the night side, showing the cities where billions of humans lived their short lives. "We should warn them," Tallery said. "We should send a message and tell them what?" Renchel asked. "That they have 3 days to live? That an enemy they cannot fight is coming to destroy everything they have ever built? What good would such a warning do?" The chamber fell silent again. Every delegate knew that Renchel was right. The humans had no defense against the Xanthari. Their weapons were primitive projectile launchers and chemical explosives. Their ships could barely reach their own moon. Against 400 Xanthari warships, they would last perhaps a few hours. "We could intervene," a young delegate from the Moran Collective suggested. "We could send our own fleet to protect them, start a war with the Xanthari Empire." Renchel shook his head. "Our combined fleets might match theirs, but the cost would be millions of lives. We would sacrifice everything to save a species that does not even know we exist." Talori closed her eyes. She knew what was about to happen, and she knew there was nothing she could do to stop it. The Galaxy Council had always believed in non-interference with primitive species. They watched and waited until a species developed the technology to join the galactic community. It was a good policy, a wise policy. But on days like this, it felt like cowardice. "Then we watch," she said quietly. "We watch, and we remember." On Earth, the day began like any other. In Kansas, a farmer named Pete Dawson drove his tractor across his fields as the sun rose over the flat horizon. He had been working this land for 30 years, just like his father before him. He knew every hill and every stream. He knew when the rain was coming and when the soil needed rest. He did not know that 400 alien warships were about to enter his planet's atmosphere. The first sign was the darkness. Pete looked up from his work and saw the sky changing color. The blue was fading, replaced by something darker, something wrong. He stopped his tractor and climbed down, shading his eyes with his hand as he stared upward. The shapes were hard to see at first. They looked like clouds, but they moved too fast and too smoothly. Then they came lower, and Pete saw them clearly for the first time. Ships. Hundreds of ships. Each one larger than any building he had ever seen. They were black and angular, covered with strange patterns that hurt his eyes to look at Pete. Stood frozen in his field, his mouth hanging open. He had seen movies about alien invasions. He had laughed at them with his friends over beers at the local bar. But this was real. This was happening. Across the world, billions of people were having the same experience. In New York City, Office workers stopped in the streets and stared at the sky. In Tokyo, trains ground to a halt as passengers pressed against the windows. In London, in Paris, in Cairo, in Mumbai, the same scene played out over and over again. Humanity looked up and saw that they were not alone in the universe. The Zenthari made no attempt at communication. They did not offer terms of surrender or make demands. They simply began to land. The first ground forces touched down in major cities within hours of the fleet's arrival. They came in dropships that screamed through the atmosphere like falling stars. They came in armor that shrugged off bullets like raindrops. They came with weapons that could reduce a tank to molten metal in seconds. Human. Military forces responded as quickly as they could. Fighter jets scrambled from bases around the world. Tanks rolled through city streets. Soldiers took up positions in buildings and behind barricades. They fought with everything they had. It was not enough. Pete Dawson watched the news from his farmhouse that night. The images were hard to believe. Washington was burning. Beijing was occupied. Moscow had fallen in less than 6 hours. The Zenthari moved through human defenses like a hot knife through butter. "They're everywhere," the news anchor said, her voice shaking. "We're receiving reports of landings on every continent. Military command has gone silent. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what to do." Pete turned off the television and sat in the darkness of his kitchen. Through the window, he could see lights in the distance, strange purple lights that had not been there yesterday. The Zenthari were building something in the fields where he had played as a child, in the Galaxy Council chamber. The delegates watched in silence as Earth fell. The Zenthari were efficient, methodical, and completely without mercy. They destroyed any human force that resisted and occupied any territory that surrendered. Within a week, they controlled most of the planet's surface. "It is over," Renchel said quietly. "The humans have lost." Talori said nothing. She was watching a small group of humans on the display, a ragged band of survivors making their way through a burned forest. They were carrying weapons and supplies. They were heading for the mountains. They were still fighting. She did not know why that small detail caught her attention. She did not know why it made her feel something she had not felt in many years. But as she watched those tiny figures struggle through the destruction of their world, she found herself hoping, against all logic and reason, that they would somehow survive. The invasion of Earth had begun, and none of the watchers in that great chamber could have guessed. What would happen next? 6 months had passed since the Zenthari arrived. The world Pete Dawson had known was gone forever. Cities lay in ruins. Governments had collapsed. Billions of people lived under alien rule, working in labor camps or hiding in the wilderness like animals, but humanity had not. Surrendered in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, a network of caves and tunnels had become the headquarters of the largest resistance movement on the continent. Over 3,000 fighters lived in those dark passages, along with doctors, engineers, farmers, and teachers. They called themselves the Free Human Army. They were led by a former Marine sergeant named Danny Crane. Danny was 34 years old, with a scarred face and eyes that had seen too much death. Before the invasion, he had been stationed at a base in California. He had watched that base burn in the first hours of the attack. He had seen friends die in seconds, their bodies torn apart by weapons they could not understand. He had run into the mountains with nothing but his rifle and his determination to keep fighting. Now, he sat in a makeshift command center, studying maps by the light of battery-powered lamps. His second-in-command, a woman named Lisa Whitfield, sat across from him. She had been an electrical engineer before the invasion, working for a tech company in Denver. Now, she built bombs and hacked alien communication systems. "The convoy will pass through this valley tomorrow morning," Lisa said, pointing to a spot on the map. 12 vehicles, including 2 supply trucks and a command vehicle. Danny nodded slowly. "Guards. About 40 Zenthari soldiers. Standard patrol formation." It was a dangerous target, but the supplies in those trucks could feed their people for months. More importantly, the command vehicle might contain information about Zenthari operations in the region. Every scrap of intelligence was precious. "We'll hit them at dawn," Danny said. "Tell the teams to get ready." In the Galaxy Council chamber, the delegates continued to watch Earth with growing amazement. 6 months ago, they had expected the humans to be completely defeated within weeks. The Zenthari had overwhelming technological superiority. They had numbers. They had experience conquering other worlds, but the humans would not stop fighting, Ambassador. Talori studied the latest reports with fascination. Across Earth, thousands of resistance groups had formed. They operated independently at first, but now they were beginning to connect, sharing information and coordinating attacks. They used radios, messengers, and even old-fashioned written codes to communicate. They are dying by the thousands, she told the council. Every attack costs them dozens of lives. The Zenthari kill 10 humans for every soldier they lose, and still the humans keep fighting. It is pointless, another delegate said. They cannot win. Why do they not accept the inevitable? Renshul, the old Korvathi diplomat, stroked his chin thoughtfully. Perhaps they do not know they cannot win. Or perhaps they do not care. The attack on the convoy came at sunrise. Danny led 50 fighters through the mountain passes, moving silently through the morning mist. They had learned to avoid Zenthari sensors by coating their bodies in mud and staying low to the ground. They had learned to move at night and strike at dawn, when the alien soldiers were changing shifts. Lisa had positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the valley. She had spent weeks building a device from salvaged Zenthari technology and human electronics. It was ugly and crude, a box of wires and circuits held together with tape. But if her calculations were correct, it would disable the Zenthari shields for exactly 12 seconds. The convoy appeared on schedule. Moving slowly through the narrow valley, Danny watched through binoculars as the alien vehicles approached. The Zenthari soldiers walked alongside the trucks, their weapons ready. They were tall and thin, with hard shells covering their bodies and multifaceted eyes that could see in every direction at once. Now, Danny whispered into his radio. Lisa pressed the button on her device. There was a flash of light. The shields around the Zenthari vehicles flickered and died. The humans opened fire. It was over in less than a minute. The Zenthari, caught without their shields, fell under a hail of bullets and homemade explosives. A few managed to return fire, killing 3 human fighters before they were brought down. When the smoke cleared, the convoy was destroyed and the supplies were theirs. Danny walked among the bodies of the fallen aliens, his face expressionless. He felt no joy in killing. He had stopped feeling much of anything months ago, but he felt something like satisfaction when he found the data storage unit in the command vehicle. Can you read this? He asked Lisa when she joined him. She studied the alien device for a moment, then nodded. I think so. It will take time, but I can figure it out. Back in the mountains, the resistance fighters celebrated their victory. Fresh food was distributed to families who had been living on dried rations for weeks. Children laughed and played in the caves, their voices echoing off the stone walls. For one night, people could almost forget that they were living in the ruins of their civilization. Danny did not celebrate. He sat alone in his quarters, reading the information Lisa had extracted from the Zenthari data unit. Most of it was supply schedules and patrol routes, useful, but not surprising. But one file caught his attention. It was a report from High Commander Vextel, the leader of the Zenthari invasion force. Danny could not read the alien language, but Lisa had created a rough translation program. The words appeared on his screen in broken English. Losses continued to mount. Human resistance more stubborn than expected. Recommend increased security measures. Morale among troops declining. Some units reporting fear of night operations. Request reinforcements. Danny read the report 3 times. The mighty Zenthari, conquerors of 17 star systems, were afraid. They were afraid of humans hiding in mountains with hunting rifles and homemade bombs. They were afraid of a species they had expected to crush in days. He smiled for the first time in months in the Galaxy Council chamber. Talori received a copy of the same report through her own intelligence sources. She shared it with the other delegates, and for a long moment no one spoke. They are actually hurting them, the Moran delegate said in disbelief. The humans are actually hurting the Zenthari. Not enough to win, Renshul replied. But perhaps enough to make the Zenthari question whether this invasion was worth the cost. Talori looked at the display showing Earth, scarred and burning, but still fighting. How do they do it? She asked quietly. How do they keep fighting when they have already lost everything? Renchel considered the question for a long moment before answering. Perhaps they have not lost everything. Perhaps they still have something worth fighting for. On Earth, the resistance continued to grow. Every Xanthari atrocity created new fighters. Every human victory inspired hope. The invaders controlled the cities and the plains, but the mountains and forests belonged to humanity. And in those dark places, people like Danny Crane and Lisa Whitfield were learning how to fight back. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. 1 year after the invasion, Xanthari began to retreat from entire regions of Earth. It started slowly, patrols being pulled back from dangerous areas. Then entire cities were abandoned as the alien forces concentrated in more defensible positions. The conquerors, who had arrived expecting easy victory, were now fighting to hold what they had taken. High Commander Vextel stood in his command center in what had once been Washington, D.C., staring at maps covered with red markers. Each marker represented a location where Xanthari forces had suffered losses. There were thousands of them, scattered across every continent. "Explain this to me," he said to his officers, his voice cold with anger. "We have the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. We have crushed species far more advanced than these primitives. How are we losing soldiers every single day?" His subordinate, a younger Xanthari named Crixtal, stepped forward nervously. "The humans do not fight like other species, Commander. They do not meet us in open battle where our superior firepower would destroy them. They hide. They wait. They attack when we are vulnerable and disappear before we can respond, and burn their hiding places. Destroy their forests and mountains. We've tried, Commander. They simply move to new locations. And every time we destroy a village or execute prisoners, more humans join the resistance. It is as if our strength makes them stronger." Vextel turned away from his officers and looked out the window at the ruined city. The humans had been clever. They had learned to target infrastructure, destroying power plants and communication towers. They had learned to attack supply lines, leaving Xanthari outposts without food or ammunition. They had turned every street corner into a potential ambush site. Most disturbing of all, they had begun to understand Xanthari technology in a hidden facility beneath the Swiss Alps. A physicist named Carol Bennett was leading a team of scientists in the most ambitious project in human history. They called it Project Phoenix. And its goal was nothing less than building a human warship capable of fighting in space. Carol was 53 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes. Before the invasion, she had worked at CERN, studying particle physics. Now, she worked 18-hour days, trying to understand alien technology that violated everything she thought she knew about the universe. The breakthrough had come 4 months ago. When resistance fighters captured a damaged Xanthari shuttle, the ship's shield generator was still partially intact, and Carol's team had spent weeks taking it apart and studying every component. The technology was incredibly advanced, but the underlying principles were not magic. They could be understood. They could be replicated. "The shield works by creating a field of charged particles around the ship," Carol explained to Danny Crane, who had traveled to the facility to see their progress. "The field deflects energy weapons and slows down projectiles. But it has a weakness." "What kind of weakness?" Danny asked. "The field requires enormous power to maintain. The Xanthari use a type of reactor we don't fully understand yet. But we found that certain frequencies of electromagnetic radiation can disrupt the field temporarily. That's how Lisa's device works." Danny nodded. He remembered the convoy ambush, how the shields had flickered and died. "Can you build ships with these shields?" Carol smiled for the first time in months. "We can do better than that. We can build ships with shields and weapons. We've been working with captured Xanthari power cells and combining them with human nuclear technology. The result is crude but effective." She led him to a massive underground hangar. Danny stopped in his tracks when he saw what was waiting there. It was a ship. It was ugly by any standard, a blocky mass of metal covered with welded panels and exposed wiring. It looked nothing like the sleek Xanthari vessels. But it was a ship built by human hands, capable of flying into space and fighting back. "We call it Liberty," Carol said. "It's not pretty, but it works." We finished the first test flight last week. In the Galaxy Council chamber, the delegates watched in stunned silence as footage of the Liberty played on the holographic display. The ship rose from the Swiss mountains, its crude engines leaving trails of fire across the sky. It climbed higher and higher until it reached orbit, where it engaged 3 Xanthari cruisers that had been sent to investigate the energy signature. The battle lasted only minutes. The Liberty destroyed 2 cruisers with modified nuclear missiles before its shields failed. The ship limped back to Earth trailing smoke, but it survived. More importantly, it had proven that humans could fight in space. "This is impossible," the Xanthari delegate to the council said, his voice shaking. "They are a pre-warp civilization. They should not be able to build functional warships." "And yet they have," Talori replied. "In 1 year, under occupation. They reverse-engineered your shield technology and built a vessel capable of destroying your cruisers. What will they build in another year, in 5 years?" The Xanthari delegate had no answer. On Earth, the news of the Liberty's victory spread like wildfire. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had struck back against the enemy in space. Resistance groups celebrated in their hidden bases. Ordinary people living under Xanthari occupation whispered the news to each other and felt something they had almost forgotten. Hope. Danny returned to his mountain headquarters with new purpose. The war was changing. It was no longer just about survival. It was about victory. "We need to coordinate," he told Lisa. "Every resistance group on the planet needs to know about Project Phoenix. We need to protect that facility and give them time to build more ships." Lisa nodded. "I've already started reaching out to other groups. There's a network forming, Danny. People are working together like never before. The Russians, the Chinese, the Europeans, everyone. The invasion destroyed our old divisions. Now we're just humans fighting for our planet." Over the next 6 months, 4 more ships were built. Each one was better than the last, incorporating lessons learned from previous designs. Human engineers worked alongside captured Xanthari scientists who had defected after seeing how their empire treated conquered peoples. Together, they created something new. It's a fusion of human determination and alien technology. The Xanthari High Command watched these developments with growing alarm. Their invasion force, once 400 ships strong, had been reduced to less than 300. The humans were not just resisting anymore. They were preparing to fight back. High Commander Vextel sent an urgent message to the Xanthari homeworld, requesting reinforcements and permission to use more extreme measures. The response came 3 days later. He was being recalled and replaced. His failure had cost the Empire too much, as his shuttle lifted off from Earth. Vexel looked down at the planet he had expected to conquer so icily. The humans were still there, still fighting, still building. He had underestimated them badly, and now his career was over. But the war was not over. Somewhere in those mountains below, Danny Crane and Lisa Whitfield were already planning their next move. The turning tide had begun, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. 2 years after the invasion, the galaxy watched Earth with a mixture of fear and wonder. What had begun as a simple conquest had become something unprecedented in recorded history. A primitive species, armed with nothing but courage and stolen. Technology was fighting the Xanthari Empire to a standstill. The Galaxy Council met in emergency session almost every week now. The delegates could not look away from the drama unfolding on that distant blue planet. Every report brought new surprises, new impossibilities,
New reasons.
to question everything they thought they knew about war and survival. "They have 27 warships now," Ambassador Talleray announced, her silver skin glowing with barely contained excitement. 27 ships, built in hidden facilities across their planet, and they are not just defending anymore. They are attacking. The holographic display showed footage that made several delegates gasp. Human vessels, crude but deadly, were striking Xanthari supply lines outside Earth's solar system. They were capturing enemy ships and adding them to their fleet. They were taking the war beyond their own world, something no pre-warp species had ever done. Renchel leaned forward, his old eyes bright with interest. How many Zenthari ships remain in Earth's space? Approximately 600, Talori replied. Empire has sent reinforcements 3 times. They keep losing them. The numbers were staggering. The Zenthari had committed over 1,000 warships to the conquest of Earth. They had lost 400 more than they had lost in any other campaign in their history. And still the humans kept fighting, on the bridge of the warship Defiance. Captain Maria Santos reviewed tactical data with her senior officers. Maria was 38 years old, with dark hair cut short and a scar running down her left cheek. Before the invasion, she had been a commercial airline pilot. Now she commanded one of humanity's most powerful vessels, intelligence reports indicate. The Zenthari are preparing something big, her first officer said. We're intercepting communications about a weapon system being transported from their homeworld. Maria studied the data carefully. The communications were fragmentary, but the pattern was clear. The Zenthari were bringing something new to Earth, something they hoped would end the war once and for all. Do we know what kind of weapon? She asked. The translations are unclear, Captain, but several messages reference planetary destruction. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. The Zenthari had weapons capable of destroying entire worlds. They had used them before, on species that resisted too strongly. Now they might be planning to use one on Earth. Maria made her decision quickly. Set course to intercept. We're not going to let that weapon reach our planet. In his mountain headquarters, Danny Crane received the same intelligence. He was a general now, recognized by resistance groups across the world as one of humanity's most important leaders. The scattered guerrilla forces had become a unified military, coordinated through a network of communication stations hidden in caves and bunkers. Lisa Whitfield sat across from him, her face pale as she read the reports. She had changed in the 2 years since the invasion. The young engineer who had built crude jamming devices was now one of humanity's foremost experts on alien technology. She had helped design the shields and weapons that protected their fleet. But some threats were beyond even her ability to counter. If they deploy a planet killer, we can't stop it, she said quietly. Our ships can fight their cruisers, but something that powerful would require weapons we don't have. Danny stood and walked to the window of his command center. Outside, he could see the mountains stretching toward the horizon, beautiful and wild. He thought about his family, dead in the first days of the invasion. He thought about the billions of people who depended on him and leaders like him to keep fighting. Then we make sure they never get the chance to use it, he said, and we make sure they know what will happen if they try. The message went out on every frequency, broadcast in every language, transmitted across the galaxy for all to hear. Danny recorded it himself, standing in front of a human flag that had been hand-sewn by survivors in his camp. This message is for the Zenthari Empire and for anyone else who is listening. We know you are planning to destroy our world. I want you to understand something very clearly. If you destroy Earth, we will not stop fighting. Every ship we have, every soldier, every human being who survives, will dedicate their existence to one purpose: the complete destruction of your empire. We will hunt you across the galaxy. We'll find your homeworld. We will make you pay for every life you have taken. This is not a threat. It is a promise. The Galaxy Council received the message. So did the Zenthari High Command. So did dozens of other species who had been watching Earth's struggle with growing interest. In the council chamber, the delegates debated what to do. Some wanted to intervene, to help the humans before the Zenthari used their terrible weapon. Others argued for continued neutrality, fearful of starting a wider war. But one thing was clear to everyone. The humans meant what they said. They will do it, Renchel said, with absolute certainty. If the Zenthari destroy Earth, the surviving humans will spend generations seeking revenge. They are not bluffing. How can you be sure? Another delegate asked. Because I have watched them for 2 years. I have seen them fight against impossible odds, sacrifice themselves without hesitation, refuse to surrender when any rational species would have given up. They do not think like us. They do not calculate costs and benefits. When they are pushed too far, they simply push back harder. The Zenthari could destroy Earth, but they would be creating an enemy that would never stop, never forget, never forgive. The debate continued for hours. Meanwhile, in the cold darkness of space, Captain Maria Santos led a fleet of 12 human ships toward the Zenthari convoy carrying the planet-killer weapon. The battle began at the edge of Earth's solar system. The Zenthari escort fleet outnumbered the humans 3-1, but Maria had chosen her engagement point carefully. The humans attacked from the cover of an asteroid field using the rocks as shields against enemy fire. The fighting was brutal. Human ships took heavy damage, their crude shields flickering under the assault of Zenthari weapons, but they pressed forward, targeting the transport vessel at the center of the convoy. Maria's ship, the Defiance, led the charge. She watched as 2 of her escort vessels exploded, killing everyone aboard. She watched as another ship rammed a Zenthari cruiser, sacrificing itself to create an opening in the enemy formation. "All weapons, target the transport," she ordered. "Everything we have." The surviving human ships opened fire together. Missiles and energy weapons streaked through space, converging on the massive Zenthari vessel. The transport shields held for most 30 seconds, then failed. The ship broke apart in a flash of light, and the planet-killer weapon was destroyed. Maria slumped in her command chair, exhausted. They had won, but the cost had been terrible. 6 ships destroyed, hundreds of lives lost, and the Zenthari would simply build another weapon. But as she looked at the wreckage drifting through space, she realized something important. The Zenthari had not expected this. They had not expected humans to intercept their weapons so far from Earth. They had not expected such desperate courage. And across the galaxy, other species were watching and learning. The humans were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were showing the universe what happened when you pushed a species too far. On the Zenthari homeworld, the High Council met to discuss the failure. For the first time in their history, they began to consider the possibility of negotiation. Not because they had lost the ability to destroy Earth, they still had that power, but because they were beginning to understand that destroying Earth might not end the war. It might just be the beginning of something far worse. The war ended not with a treaty, ceremony, or a formal surrender, but with silence. One morning, 3 years after the first Zenthari ship entered Earth's atmosphere, the remaining alien forces simply began to leave. Dropships rose from occupied cities. Orbital stations were abandoned. The great black warships that had darkened Earth's skies gathered in formation and jumped to faster than light speed, disappearing into the void between stars. For hours, humanity waited, expecting a trick. Resistance fighters stayed in their positions, weapons ready. The human fleet maintained battle formation, watching for any sign of renewed attack. But the Zenthari did not return. They were truly gone. Danny Crane received the news in his mountain headquarters. He sat in silence for a long time, unable to process what he was hearing. After 3 years of constant fighting, after losing so many friends and watching so much destruction, he had almost forgotten what peace felt like. Lisa Whitfield found him still sitting there an hour later, staring at nothing. She sat down beside him and took his hand. "It's over," she said quietly. "We won." Danny shook his head slowly. "Did we look at what they did to us? Billions dead. Cities destroyed. Our whole civilization burned to the ground. Is this winning?" Lisa squeezed his hand. "We're still here. Our children will grow up free. That's winning, Danny. That's the only thing that ever mattered." In the Galaxy Council chamber, the delegates watched Earth with expressions ranging from relief to fear. The Zenthari withdrawal was unprecedented. Never before had they abandoned a conquest once begun. Never before had a primitive species forced them to retreat. They simply left, the Moran delegates said in disbelief. After committing over 1,000 ships, after 3 years of war, they just walked away. Renshall nodded slowly. The Zenthari are not fools. They calculated the cost of continuing the war and decided it was too high. The humans were not just killing their soldiers. They were inspiring resistance in other conquered territories. The longer the war continued, the more the Empire bled. Ambassador Talori stepped forward, her silver skin shimmering with complex emotions. "The question now is what we do about the humans. They are no longer a pre-warp species. They have ships capable of interstellar travel. They have weapons that can threaten established powers. We cannot pretend they do not exist. The debate that followed lasted for weeks. Some delegates argued that humanity should be contained, limited, prevented from expanding beyond their own system. They pointed to the violence of human history, the ruthlessness they had shown in war. A species capable of such destruction could not be trusted. Others disagreed. They had watched humans sacrifice themselves to protect each other. They had seen the way human communities came together in crisis, helping strangers and sharing limited resources. The same species that could fight with such ferocity could also show remarkable compassion. In the end, the decision was made by a single vote. Humanity would be offered full membership in the Galaxy Council with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. They would be treated as equals, not as primitives to be studied or threats to be contained. The invitation was transmitted to Earth 6 months after the war ended. Danny Crane, now serving as the leader of the Provisional Human Government, read it with his council of advisors. The message was formal and diplomatic, full of complex protocols and requirements. But the meaning was simple. Humanity was being welcomed into the galactic community. "They want us to send a representative," Lisa said, scanning the document. "Someone to speak for our species at the council." Danny looked around the table at the men and women who had survived the war with him. Generals and scientists, doctors and engineers, people who had given everything to keep humanity alive. Any of them could have served as ambassador. "I'll go," he said finally. "I started this fight. I should see it through to the end." The journey to the Galaxy Council took 3 weeks in a captured Zenthari vessel that human engineers had modified. Danny spent most of that time preparing, studying everything humanity knew about the various species he would be meeting. Lisa traveled with him as his chief advisor, along with Maria Santos and a small security team. The council chamber was larger than anything Danny had ever seen. The dome of crystal and light stretched high above, filled with stars that seemed close enough to touch. 12 different species watched from their designated areas as the human delegation entered. Danny walked to the podium that had been prepared for him. He looked at the assembled delegates, a creature so different from himself that they might as well have been dreams. He thought about everything humanity had suffered to reach this moment. Then he began to speak. 3 years ago, you watched us die. You watched the Zenthari invade our world, and you did nothing. I do not say this to accuse you. I understand why you made that choice. We were primitive. We were insignificant. We were not worth the risk. He paused, letting his words settle over the chamber. But we survived. Not because we were stronger than our enemies, or smarter, or more advanced. We survived because we refused to give up. When our cities burned, we retreated to the mountains and kept fighting. When our soldiers died, civilians picked up their weapons and kept fighting. When everything seemed hopeless, we built ships with our own hands and kept fighting. The delegates were silent, transfixed by the small humans standing before them. You have invited us to join your council. We accept. But we want you to understand something about who we are. We did not defeat the Zenthari alone. We were helped by every human who ever lived, by thousands of years of history that taught us how to struggle against impossible odds. Our ancestors fought against nature, against disease, against each other. They never stopped fighting, and neither will we. Danny straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the assembled delegates. We do not seek war. We have seen enough destruction to last 1,000 lifetimes, but we will never again be victims. We will never again watch our people die while others stand by and do nothing. If any species threatens us, or threatens the innocent, we will fight. And as you have seen, we do not know how to quit. He stopped speaking. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, Renchel rose from his seat. The old Korvathi diplomat walked to the center of the chamber and stood facing Danny. 3 years ago, I said that the humans did not know they had already lost, and that perhaps that was why they hadn't. I was wrong. The humans knew exactly what they were facing. They knew the odds against them. They simply chose to fight anyway. He turned to address the other delegates. I have lived for 400 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species destroy themselves and others. But I have never seen anything like what the humans did. They have earned their place among us, not through technology or wealth, but through courage and sacrifice. I am proud to call them our equals." One by one, the other delegates rose and added their voices to his. The motion passed unanimously. Danny Crane, former Marine Sergeant, guerrilla fighter, and now ambassador, looked at the stars through the crystal dome above. Somewhere out there was Earth, scarred but healing, broken but rebuilding. His species had paid a terrible price to reach this moment, but they had reached it. Against all odds, against the might of the greatest empire in the galaxy. Humanity had survived. And looking at the delegates around him, at the beginning of a new chapter in human history, Danny allowed himself to hope that the future might be brighter than the past. The war was over. A new dawn had begun.